And I'm rolling. Okay.
Hello.
You're ready.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. My name is Chucha Barber, and I'm the former executive director of the Mary Brogan Museum of Art and Science.
Um, can you describe the Romanino painting and its importance as art?
I can describe the Romanino painting. When the Brogan Museum was fortunate enough to get a body of work from the Pinacoteca da Brera in Milan, Italy, um, the paintings came to us with a very prescribed order of how the objects should be hung in the gallery. And this was a little surprising to us because that was very unusual in terms of practices for getting a body of work from another museum to put on display. And the reason I bring this up is that we were instructed to make the Romanino painting the very first painting that you see when you started the tour through the gallery. And it wouldn't be until several months later, during the course of the exhibition, that we would come to be suspicious about why the Romanino was told to us to be the first painting in the sequence of the paintings in the gallery. In terms of its significance, what was interesting about this project was severalfold. First of all, one of my colleagues at the Brogan Museum was selected by the local Rotary Club to be a representative to go with a group to Italy. And it's something that's done on an annual basis. And those that are selected have to be gone for 6 months. So although I knew I was going to lose maybe my most important staff person, 6 weeks. Let me say that again. Those that are selected are gone for 6 weeks. And although I knew I was going to lose one of my most important staff people for 6 weeks, I thought it was an opportunity of a lifetime. But I also thought it was a great opportunity for the Brogan Museum. And I said to her, when you get over there, when you meet those people, you see if you can get permission to bring a group of Italian paintings back to Tallahassee. Until that time, no museum in the United States of America had ever hosted a body of work from an Italian museum. There had been, on occasion, a particular painting loaned to a particular museum, but never had a collection of work come from one of the most prestigious Italian government museums to any museum in the United States. So imagine our crazy excitement when it was going to come to the little old Brogan Museum in Tallahassee.
Can you
Okay,
can you tell us the story about the Romanino painting?
I can. When the exhibit was at the Mary Brogan Museum, I'd like to tell you a story about the Romanino painting. When the exhibit was at the Mary Brogan Museum, one night, as usual, I was working late, and it was about 7 o'clock, and my phone rang. And I answered the phone, and a woman said, "Hello, is this Chucha Barber?" And I said, "It is." She said, "My name is Pamela Marsh, and I'm a U.S. attorney." I said, "Hello, Miss Marsh." She said, "I'm calling you because one of the paintings in your Baroque exhibit is stolen." And I said, "Oh my goodness, somebody stole one of the paintings upstairs?" And I'm freaking out. And it turned out that it wasn't that someone had come in and stolen a painting from the museum, which was my first thought, but rather one of the paintings in the exhibit, specifically the Romanino, had actually been stolen from its rightful owners in Italy during the Second World War by Nazi soldiers. And although we will probably never be sure of its travels, eventually it ended up at the Pinacoteca da Brera, and when we borrowed objects from the museum, it ended up at the Mary Brogan Museum of Art and Science on display.
Describe the actual handover to the U.S. authorities.
Well, it was rather amazing. There were, first of all, there was a lot of conversation between the United States government and the Italian government about what should transpire. And there was definitely a belief among many United States officials that the painting should be returned to its rightful owner, the original family. And the reason for that belief was that there was a precedent for that, including objects that also were the original property of that particular family, which had ended up at the Louvre and were returned to the family. So there was a precedent for it. However, the Italian government was not very interested in giving up a multi-million-dollar painting for any reason. The truth is that there was a law that said that if a museum was going to borrow objects from an international source, you had to clear it with the United States Department of State. I was not aware of that law because I had never borrowed art before. Even though I'd been a museum professional for 25 years, I'd never borrowed art from a foreign country before. And I wasn't aware of that requirement. I did confer with the state of Florida Department of State because I thought that I could learn everything I needed to know about this experience. But lo and behold, I did not learn enough. And Homeland Security and other federal officials came to the museum and seized the painting and put it in storage at an undisclosed location because there was significant concern that in fact someone would try to steal the painting while it was en route to the storage site between the Brogan Museum and wherever it was going. And ultimately, the painting was returned to the family.
Okay. Why would Italy not want to give up the painting, especially since they often request their own illicitly acquired antiquities back?
Well, you know, it's a great question to want to know why the Italian government was reluctant to give up their this particular painting, considering that they have a history of wanting their own paintings and antiquities back. And one of the reasons I think is very interesting. And this is subjective on my part because no one from the Italian government said, hey, Chucha, these are the reasons. So, but subjectively, I would tell you this. Many of the most beautiful artworks that belong to Italian government-owned museums were acquisitions of Napoleon Bonaparte's army. Napoleon raged through Europe and stole paintings right and left, which became the property of Italian museums. So there's also a history that some of the things in their collections were never their rightful property. So I suppose there's, it could be argued, at what point does an object belong forever to the museum that's maintaining it in perpetuity for the appreciation and understanding of audiences in that community and around the world? And at what point does the institution have a moral and other obligation to give it back to its rightful owner? And then I think the small matter of a few $1 million was also a consideration.
Okay. Using the words rights and responsibilities, can you discuss the rights and responsibilities regarding conflict art for governments, the rightful owners, and the museum person that currently has that piece?
Okay. I need you to read that to me one more time.
All right. So using the words rights and responsibilities, can you discuss the rights and responsibilities regarding conflict art for governments, the rightful owners, and the museum person that currently has the piece?
Okay. Currently, I do not know who owns the Romanino painting. And the reason is that there were 6 equal heirs who are all grandchildren of the man from whom the painting was stolen. And they all agreed that they loved it and they wanted it. And you can't cut a beautiful painting into 6 pieces. And so they auctioned the piece at Christie's. and they shared in the proceeds of the sale. And the buyer, to the best of my knowledge, remains anonymous to this day. So I do not believe, however, that it's in the hands of another museum, but I don't know that to be true. In terms of rights and responsibilities, the first thing I would share with you is I believe it's the responsibility of every museum everywhere in the world to protect beautiful things that come into their possession, for the understanding and admiration of literally people all over the world. Once upon a time, it was limited to your community, but today, with internet and digital images and many, many other advents of technology, literally you can learn all about the Mona Lisa without ever going to Italy. Having said that, I do think that there is a fundamental responsibility to return objects to their rightful owners. And the most stellar example I can give you of that relates to objects that belong to Native American tribes in the United States. I once had the privilege of going to a conference that was hosted by the Smithsonian Institution, and the Smithsonian was preparing for the museum opening of the Museum of Man, which is the facility that's all about Native American heritage. And we went into a storage room in Delaware where it was filled with all kinds of Native American artifacts that belonged to many tribes from all over the United States. And when I went into the room, I felt ill. I mean, I really felt ill, and it was a strange sensation. And I turned to one of my colleagues, who also happens to be Native American, and I said to him, I feel sick. And he said, "Of course you do. We are not worthy. We don't deserve to be among these things." Subsequent to that conversation, I met a woman who was Cherokee, and she asked me to help her tribe get back some objects that were in the hands of individual museums. And I said to her, "Don't you think it's important for people of all cultures to understand the significance of these objects and why they're important to your tribe?" And she said, "No, they are ours. They belong to us. And we cannot conduct certain ritualistic practices with the absence of those objects." So when I started to think about it in terms of the importance of an entire culture's ability to maintain certain practices and teachings and pass those down to other future members of the tribe, it sort of changed my perspective. There's no question that there has historically been a lot of looting and stealing of artifacts, antiquities, and precious objects and archaeological things for a very, very long time. I think that when a museum finds out that there really is a rightful owner, it's my personal belief that the museum has an obligation to return it to its rightful owner.
Okay. Can you discuss the UNESCO Convention of 1970 that outlines the rules of provenance regarding art and antiquities?
Well, I'm not that familiar with it. What's it called again? The what?
The UNESCO Convention of 1970.
UNESCO's? Is that the pronunciation?
UNESCO.
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 UNESTO?
CO. Like UNESCO.
UNESCO. I don't know that I'm in a position that I can discuss the UNESCO decision. I can only tell you that I am certain that there have been a number of state and federally enacted pieces of legislation that are intended to protect the objects and the rightful ownership of objects, and what should happen in the event that an object ends up in the hands of even a beloved institution of fine art that's well respected. But there is a process in the United States among museums called accreditation. And fewer than 3% of all the museums in the United States are accredited institutions. Interestingly enough, Tallahassee has several that are. The Museum of Florida History, the Tallahassee Museum of History and Natural Science, and the Florida State Museum of Fine Art. That's kind of unprecedented to have so many really amazing museums in one small community. But the point is really that if you're an accredited museum, you operate with the highest standards and practices. And to do so means that if you were to discover that you were in possession of an object that had been obtained through inappropriate means, you have a responsibility and an obligation to resolve that matter in the best interest of the rightful owner.
At the Hague Convention?
I know a little bit about the Hague Convention because, frankly, some of that language came into play during my experience regarding the Romanino painting. And if I'm recalling my experience correctly, it seems to me that that's where the obligation came for a museum borrowing objects from an international source to make sure that the United States Department of State was aware of the nature of the object, the amount of time it was going to be in the country, a description of the object. There is today a very large database of stolen objects. So if I had done what I probably should have done but didn't know to do, it probably would have been run through that database and shown up as a stolen object before it made its way from Italy and was placed in the Brogan Museum.
Can you discuss the importance of establishing provenance of art before purchasing or exhibiting in a museum?
I can discuss provenance of art and the importance before purchasing and exhibiting in a museum. My personal experiences in the museum industry is I never had the luxury of working for a museum that had resources to buy art, so I don't know much about the buying part, but I do know about the exhibiting part. And one of the things I would share with you is that if you are dealing with a museum of high caliber and reputation, there's a certain amount of trust that goes into the contractual process where you're pretty sure they're not giving you something that they're not supposed to have. On the other hand, an institution might not be aware of the original origin. So each organization must do diligence to ensure the appropriateness of the objects they display or loan.
Is there anything we haven't asked you that you think we should?
I would say that, yes. I would like to say that I think that there are many, many amazing pieces of art and antiquities that are currently in the hands of institutions and individuals that should be returned to the rightful owner, that were acquired during acts of war over hundreds of years. And anytime there is an opportunity to return them to the rightful owner, I think it's a victory for mankind, and I celebrate that.
Alrighty.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I have a quick, why was that one particular piece so important? That Rome, what was, and you know, what is it about that painting that makes it special?
You might want to answer to her. Dave, I don't know if you want to roll.
You know what I'm saying? What's so special about that one piece, just in its history of art, or you know, who the painter was, or?
Well, the painting Romanino is referred to it as the Romanino because that's the name of the artist. But the actual title of the painting was Christ bearing the cross. If you could see the painting in person, the coat that Jesus was wearing is tangerine, and the sheen that the artist's technique gives off makes it glow right off of the canvas. It's a very powerful piece. the truth is, it was not the most expensive painting in the collection. It was not the most significant object in the collection in terms of art history. However, because it had been stolen from a private family and discovered while it was at the Brogan Museum, it obtained a level of notoriety that none of the other paintings did.
Alrighty.